I will never forget that night as long as I live. Mother, you don't have any Social Security benefits. Are you planning on staying here for good? The question, delivered across the dinner table after our meal, was colder and sharper than any knife. It sliced my heart clean in two. I couldn't say a word in response. I simply set my fork down, my hand trembling slightly, and quietly pushed my chair back from the table. My son's wife, Lauren, gathered the empty plates and added with a sigh, "In this day and age, even older people have to be self-sufficient. We just don't have the extra money." I walked over to a small chair in the corner of the kitchen and sat down, my hands shaking as I poured myself a cup of hot water from the kettle. The sound of the water filling the mug was the only noise in the room. No one said anything. It was as if I had never truly been a part of this family to begin with. And it was true. I don't receive Social Security. My husband passed away so young, and after he was gone, I could never find a stable, full-time job. For decades, I juggled part-time work while caring for my sick mother-in-law. Before I knew it, any chance to think about my own future, to plan for my own old age, had vanished completely. But then, "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" The voice belonged to none other than the son I had poured my entire life into raising. For a fleeting moment, I almost smiled. But his eyes, they were distant, almost formal, and he looked frightened. I slowly got to my feet and walked back toward the table in the center of the living room. I reached into my purse, pulled out a single manila envelope, and placed it on the table without a word. "What's this?" Lauren picked up the envelope, opened the clasp, and slid out the contents. She froze. Inside, there was a set of official-looking documents and a single, yellowed newspaper clipping. "No way, is this?" I spoke softly, my voice steady. "I am not just some old woman with no retirement savings, as you seem to think." In that instant, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. Even the scent of the tea I'd just brewed seemed to sink and grow heavy in the tense, silent space. That night, for the first time, I showed them who I really was. I revealed my true self to the people I had thought were my family. But it wasn't an act of pride, not a way of showing off. It was my last, desperate plea to be allowed to stay in this home. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am 74 years old, and for many years, I was a master embroiderer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I lost my husband when I was 60, and with no pension or savings to speak of, I continued to rely on my craft to survive. When the moonlight would gently filter into my small workshop, I would take a fine needle and delicate thread in my hands, stitching patterns into fabric, one careful stitch at a time. My favorite was a small seashell design. It came from a memory of walking along a California beach with my husband when we were young. In the quiet of the night, the soft swoosh of the thread passing through the linen was my only comfort, a soothing balm for my loneliness. I never took on an apprentice, never trained a successor. My embroidery was a private ritual that guarded my heart. In those days, I would wake each morning and look out my window at the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. My first thought was always the same: I'm alive for one more day. My dinners were simple, but as long as I had my needle and thread, I felt as if someone, somewhere, still cared for me. A few years ago, that life came to an end. I tripped and fell on the old wooden stairs of my house in Santa Fe. I landed hard, injuring my hip, and my doctor delivered the news with a somber expression. "Living alone just isn't going to be safe for you anymore," he told me. The diagnosis left me feeling utterly defeated, but my son offered a lifeline. "Mom, would you come live with us in New York?" It was Michael, calling from the city where he worked as a successful engineer. His voice was unusually gentle, a tone I hadn't heard from him in a long time. I knew he lived well, and I'd heard his wife was a quiet woman. Still, a part of me hesitated. It will be so much trouble for them, I thought. What will his sophisticated wife think of me? But faced with the realities of aging and chronic pain, my pride began to crumble. The day I made my decision, I left Santa Fe with nothing but my cell phone and a small suitcase. I had packed my essential embroidery tools and a few changes of clothes, and with a heart full of anxiety, I boarded a cross-country bus for the long ride east. I arrived in New York in the early hours of the morning. The endless gray of the cityscape filled me with a mixture of dread and anticipation. When I finally reached Michael's building, a sleek, high-rise tower, I found myself in a long, sterile hallway lined with identical, stylish doors. The silence was absolute, inorganic, and a knot of apprehension tightened in my chest. I knocked, and Michael opened the door. "Mom, you made it. Thank you for coming." In that moment, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. His face was thinner than I remembered. He offered me a kind, gentle smile, as if trying to shield me from any sadness for even a second. But behind him stood his wife, Lauren. Her expression was tight, and she offered only a single, clipped word. "Welcome." Then she turned and disappeared deeper into the apartment. Her voice was quiet, clearly strained with suppressed emotion. Michael leaned in and whispered, "The living room is this way." I followed him wordlessly into the apartment. It was a vast, white space. Through a wall of windows, I could see the Empire State Building piercing the skyline, but the view brought me no comfort. A chill, an emptiness, seemed to blow through the room and right through my heart. For the first few days, I lived in silence. I would wake at 8, carefully put away my needles and threads, and sit quietly in the living room with a cup of tea. Michael would be scrolling through his phone and would ask, out of a sense of duty, "Mom, want something to drink? Coffee?" When I'd reply, "Just a little hot water, please," I would see Lauren's face immediately cloud over. "Are you sure?" Michael would ask, glancing at her. "I'm fine," I'd say with a strained smile. Our interactions felt like delicate diplomatic negotiations, each word carefully weighed. In the evenings, the three of us would have a simple dinner. When I tried to talk about my embroidery, Michael would listen with a placid expression, but Lauren's eyes never left her smartphone screen. "Your work sounds very intricate, Evelyn," she would murmur, and an awkward silence would descend upon us once more. After dinner, I would retreat to my small room, lay down on the guest bed, and quietly wipe away the tears that came. I felt a loneliness here that I had never known when I lived by myself, a deep, crushing anxiety, the constant question of whether I even had a right to be here. Still, I would tell myself, I have my embroidery. I have that one thing that is essential to who I am. Embroidery, after all, was the act of creating a place with an invisible thread. As long as I held that thread, I thought, surely I could survive anywhere. When I woke in the mornings, I'd look out my window and see a single ray of sunlight breaking through the gray New York sky. It felt like a small reward, a tiny gift just for me. The cold stares in the apartment never ceased, but I was determined. I would find a way to stitch my own color onto these stark, white walls. No matter how many cold words were thrown my way, I had my memories, and those, they could never take away. I remembered a time when my husband was still alive. Michael was just a little boy, and on summer evenings, the three of us would take a walk along the creek behind our house. My husband always had a bandana tied around his neck, and Michael would run ahead, gleefully swinging a little bug-catching net. "Dad, look, a grasshopper. Wow, that's a big one, Mikey." I would walk slowly behind them, just watching their backs. That simple image was enough to fill my heart to bursting. I'll never forget the time we all made homemade pizza together. I chopped the peppers and onions, my husband mixed the dough, and Michael was in charge of grating the cheese. He fumbled and sent a shower of mozzarella all over the floor, and he and his father looked at each other and just burst out laughing. I couldn't help but laugh along with them. "Oh, you two?" I can still hear the sound of our laughter echoing in my memory. A perfectly ordinary dinner, and yet it might have been the most precious moment of my life. I remember Michael's first day of kindergarten. He stood at the front door, looking so small in his new clothes, and he bowed his head to me and his father. "Okay, I'm going. I'll be good and listen to the teacher," he announced seriously. I waved goodbye, fighting back tears. In that moment, I believed with all my heart, as long as I have this child, everything will be all right. Doc Ray. And I remember the night, just after his father died, when Michael came home from college. He sat with me in the quiet kitchen and said, "Mom, you don't have to push yourself so hard. I'm here now." I can't even begin to describe how much those words saved me. That kindness became a light that has flickered in my heart ever since. Even if we were distant now, even if things were difficult, as long as I had these memories of light, I knew I could keep moving forward. And I had to believe that one day, I would be able to laugh with someone again, just like we used to. Less than a week after I moved into that New York high-rise, the feeling that I was not welcome began to close in on me. One night, I was walking down the hall to use the bathroom when I heard, hushed, voices coming from the living room. I held my breath and listened. It was Lauren, talking to someone on the phone. She has no social security, no savings, nothing. "We can't take care of her forever. It's impossible." I know. The words were like nails driven into my chest. Was I really seen as nothing more than a burden simply because I was old? The next morning, I tried to act as if I'd heard nothing, but the air at the breakfast table was heavy and thick. Michael refused to meet my eyes. "Michael, would you like some more coffee?" I asked. "No, thank you," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on his plate. The steam rising from my mug blurred my vision. Later that afternoon, something on my phone caught my eye and made my stomach drop. The name of the family group chat had been changed. It now read, Family 3. I was not included in that number. I was no longer family. I was just someone else. The reality of it settled on my shoulders like a physical weight. A voice inside me screamed, "This isn't right," but the words wouldn't come out. I was simply a presence, slowly being erased from the family circle. That night, huddled in my room, clutching an old embroidered shawl I had made years ago, I remembered something an old friend once said to me. "You watch out, Evelyn. If you get old with no money, you become an inconvenience real fast." I had laughed it off at the time. But now, her words were becoming my reality. I whispered the question to myself in the dark. Am I useless to my own family? The barbs and subtle aggressions continued. Every time I went into the kitchen, I would hear them whispering behind my back. "It's so stressful having her just wander into the kitchen whenever she wants." The moment I heard that, my hand froze on the knife I was using to slice an apple. I used to make myself a small bowl of soup every morning. Now, I found myself hesitating at the kitchen doorway, afraid to enter. I felt like I was losing my place in the world, one room at a time. After that, I rarely joined them for meals. I brought an electric kettle into my room and began making my own tea, steeping it in the quiet solitude. I had become afraid of conversation in the living room, but one day, Michael quietly left a small sandwich on the nightstand by my bed. There was no note, but I knew it was from him. "We had extra," was all he said later. His words were a lifeline. Maybe he's struggling with this too, I thought. Deep in my heart, a tiny spark of hope ignited. I haven't been completely abandoned yet. WS. WC. But whether I was truly accepted as family remained a painful, unanswered question. I spent many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself over and over, do I have a right to be here? In the darkness, with only the soft ticking of the clock, I found I had no more tears to cry. My eyes were dry, but a dull ache echoed constantly in my chest. I thought about my old life, when my work defined me, the feel of the needle in my hand, the creation of a beautiful piece of art, had been my anchor. Had I lost even that role? Then, another small glimmer of light appeared. The door to my room creaked open one evening, and Michael came in. "I made some soup. Would you like some?" he asked awkwardly, but with a sincerity that touched me. He held out a steaming bowl. The simple warmth of it seemed to melt a tiny piece of the ice around my heart. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't being completely rejected, but I wasn't being accepted either. I was living on the fragile, blurry border of what they called a family. And I decided right then and there that I could not let myself become invisible. I would not simply fade away. It was the moment a small seed of resolve began to sprout. That evening's dinner was shrouded in a frigid silence. Though a plate of food had been set for me at the table, I had no appetite. I was thinking, I said, mustering my courage. I should probably get my health insurance sorted out, get a local doctor. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Insurance? Mom, you don't have any income. You can't seriously be planning to live in New York permanently, can you? Her words landed like a physical blow, and the tension at the table became unbearable. A few grains of rice fell from my fork onto the tablecloth. What? I whispered. My son, her husband, looked down at his plate, his expression pained. Ah, Mom, times are different now. Kids can't just support their parents anymore. We can't afford it. I'm sorry, he said. The words squeezed the air from my lungs. It felt like my world was collapsing. But I tried to say, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't force them out. Instead, my hand began to tremble, so violently that I dropped my fork onto the floor with a clatter. A few stray peas rolled under the table. The eyes of the family watching me were cold, their gazes creating a distance I could feel in the air. A deep chill settled over my heart, freezing it solid. When dinner was over, I excused myself without a word and walked out onto the balcony. The New York City skyline spread out before me like a field of countless stars, but their light offered no warmth. It felt cold and indifferent. All the lights in this city are so beautiful, I whispered to myself, my voice swallowed by the vastness of the night. But is there a place for me in any of them? In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of traffic, a constant hum that defined the city's life. A breeze brushed against my cheek. That night, wind felt like it carried the presence of millions of people, but all I could feel was my own profound loneliness. I rested my hands on the cool metal of the railing and looked down. Far below, a single tiny light flickered in the small courtyard garden of the building next door. Staring at that solitary light, I asked myself the question that had been haunting me for weeks. Do I have any right to be here? After I retired, after I lost my husband, I had poured my life into two things: teaching my craft and my embroidery. I took pride in the life I had built for myself, a life of discipline, respect, and quiet dignity. But now, as I stood on that balcony, I saw that pride being stripped away from me, piece by piece, by the very people I thought were my family. I glanced down at my phone and saw a new message. It was from an old friend back in Santa Fe. I heard things had been hard, but you were always the strongest person I knew, Evelyn. No matter where you are still you. Tears I didn't know I had left began to stream down my face. Thank you, was all I could manage to type back before I quietly turned the screen off. When I went back inside, I slipped into my small room and curled up under the covers. The New York night felt colder, more isolating than I had ever imagined. But in that cold, in that loneliness, a small seed of a new idea, a tiny resolution, began to sprout within me. Do I have a right to be here? No, but maybe I can build a new place for myself. I came to this city because I wanted to be near my son and my grandchild. As long as I held on to that wish, I could not let myself disappear. I could not simply fade away. I told myself that over and over until the darkness began to lift. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual and went straight to the kitchen. I prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and toast and made a pot of vegetable soup, the kind of simple, nurturing task that had always been my quiet pride. My hands still trembled, but I moved with care and precision, pouring all of my focus into the small ritual. When I was done, I placed a bowl of the hot soup on a tray in the living room. The steam rose from it in a gentle, white curl, and the sight of it lit a quiet flame in my heart. I still want to be a mother. I still want to be a grandmother. Holding that thought close, I decided I had to face forward. I couldn't stop thinking about why Lauren had said what she did that night. You don't have Social Security. Are you planning on staying here? Behind that single, sharp question, I knew there was a deep well of her own anxiety and frustration. She had grown up in a comfortable, upper-middle-class family, a woman who had lived her entire life according to a plan. College funds for the children, the mortgage on the apartment, the 401k for their own retirement, everything in her world was calculated, quantified. her future determined by efficiency and financial planning. For someone like her, the sudden arrival of an elderly mother-in-law with no pension and no income was a massive, unforeseen variable. It was an error in the spreadsheet of her life. This is going to throw off our entire retirement plan, she must have thought. We don't have the money to take care of someone else's parent. I could almost hear her repeating those words to herself, over and over. More than hating her, I felt like I could almost see her fear. On the other hand, there was my son Michael. I will never, ever forget the look on his face. In that moment of crushing silence after I dropped my fork, he couldn't say a single word. He just sat there, his head bowed, staring into his bowl of soup. His expression was a storm of confusion, anguish, and a guilt so profound it seemed to weigh him down in his chair. He was torn. I know he was. Torn between wanting to protect me and wanting to keep the peace in his own home. But he didn't choose. He didn't speak up. My son, because he was a gentle soul, was unable to say anything at all. That night, his back looked so small, so defeated. "I'm sorry, Mom." He never said the words out loud, but his silence told me everything. That afternoon, I found my old, worn suitcase sitting by itself in the middle of the living room floor. It was so out of place in the sleek, modern apartment that it felt like a statement, a silent eviction notice. "Michael asked me to get this out for you." It was her. Lauren, my son's wife. Her voice was flat, carrying the weight of an unpleasant duty, with an undercurrent of something cold and final. I looked down at the floor, then slowly nodded my head. "I see." No other words would come. As a dull ache spread through my chest, I asked her another question. Did I do something to offend you?" My daughter-in-law turned her face away from me. She remained silent, refusing to answer. My son was standing next to her, but he wouldn't meet my eyes either. He just folded his arms across his chest in an awkward, defensive posture. That unspoken silence became a chasm, deepening the distance between the three of us. The chill in the room was palpable now, a physical presence on my skin. It felt like the cold of an unplugged heater mixed with the darkness pressing against the windows, a perfect symbol of my own existence in this home. I took a steadying breath and asked one more time, if my husband were still alive, would you be saying these things to me?" At that question, my son froze, his eyes still fixed on the floor. My daughter-in-law, without a word, turned to leave the room, and Michael followed right behind her. In that brief, terrible moment, a frozen wave of fear washed over me. We are not a family. That's what their silence meant. It meant that their life, the one they were building together, did not include me. The door to their bedroom clicked shut. Hearing that sound, I knew for certain. My heart was breaking, but my mind was clear. "I understand," I whispered to the empty room. My voice was a mixture of resignation and sorrow. I bent my back and picked up the handle of the old suitcase. Inside, there was almost nothing. An old hand-knitted shawl, my small collection of embroidery tools. The rest was just memories. And my pride. I walked down the hallway as quietly as I could, so they wouldn't hear me leaving. I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward the front door. In the small mirror by the entryway, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection and was startled by what I saw. My face, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the hall window, looked frightened, yes, but it also looked resolute. It was as if the real me, the person I had been all along, was finally looking back at me. I spoke to her, to myself, in a quiet whisper. "Evelyn, you have lived a good life. You have done nothing wrong." Outside, a cold wind was blowing. I clutched the sleeve of my thin sweater, and when I took a deep breath, my chest shuddered. But I took a small step forward. In that instant, a firm decision took root in my soul. I will live as myself. And realizing that, feeling that, was the biggest step of all. That evening, standing in front of the apartment door with my small suitcase in hand, I kept asking myself the same questions. What have I been living for all these years? Was my life always meant to end like this? My mind drifted back to when Michael was just a little boy. After his father got sick and passed away, I took on any embroidery work I could find. I worked from morning until night, through cold days and rainy days, stitching and stitching just to make enough money for his school lunches and his tuition. I remember waking in the middle of the night to check on him, tucking the blanket around his small body. When he had a fever, I'd spend the whole night by his side, rubbing his back, sleepless until the dawn. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to make life easy for you," he used to say, his innocent voice still echoing in my ears. But the grown man standing before me now, my son, couldn't even look me in the eye. He chose silence. That silence was the answer that cut me out of the family. A wave of regret, so powerful it almost made me want to scream, churned inside me. Do you have any idea how many meals I skipped so I could buy you that new backpack for school? Do you know how many times I pricked my fingers with a needle, bleeding onto the fabric, just to save enough for your first college tuition payment? But there was no one I could say these things to. When I saw the old photograph tacked to the kitchen refrigerator, a picture of my son as a small boy, smiling his bright, gap-toothed smile, all I wanted to do was weep. To have all those years of love and sacrifice treated as if they never existed. The pain of it was beyond words. I am a mother. I dedicated my entire life to protecting and raising another human being. But now, in this home, I was seen as nothing more than a burden. That fact, more than anything else, was what broke my heart. That night, I did not cry. I felt no anger. I just walked back into the living room, calmly took the old shawl from my shoulders, and placed a small, wooden box on the center of the dining table. Inside, there was no envelope. There was cash, neat, orderly stacks of $100 bills. The total amount was $70,000. It was the money I had earned, one stitch at a time, and saved for 40 years. My life savings. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. The few seconds that passed felt as long as all the years of silence between us. "This is the money I saved," I said, my voice slow and steady. "For 40 years, while I worked on my embroidery, I saved every single penny I could for your education, for your future. During all that time, I never paid into Social Security. I couldn't afford to. Because, because my one dream was that one day, with my own two hands, I could help send you to college." The silence continued, but my voice did not waver. "But if you feel that I am a burden, then please, take this money. But please, I ask you not to think of me as someone who only knows how to depend on others." I said my piece and took my hands away from the box. In that moment, I heard the small, soft click of the wooden lid closing. And then, I heard a sound I had not heard in years. "Mom, I'm so sorry." The voice was trembling. My son, Michael, was on his knees weeping. Across from him, his wife, Lauren, had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Mom, I was a fool. A complete fool. I couldn't understand how much you were suffering until you did this. But tonight I see what you've been carrying. I see what a proud, incredible person you are." His voice was thick with a genuine, soul-deep regret. "Mom, please, can you ever forgive me?" I just kept looking into his eyes. It felt as if 30 empty years were flooding back into them all at once. I didn't want your money," I said softly. I just wanted you to believe in me. To believe that I loved you. And to believe that a day would come when you would remember that you loved your mother too." I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a handkerchief. I held it out to him. "I didn't need to see your tears. I just needed to hear your 'I'm sorry' a little sooner. But tonight, if this is the moment you find your way back, then for me, it is enough." After that, the silence that had held our family captive was finally broken. One by one, they returned to their seats at the table and began to talk in quiet voices. They talked about what to make for dinner the next day, about their plans for the future, and then, they even started talking about clearing out a space in the spare room so I could set up my embroidery again. That night was the first time in more than a decade that the whole family was truly together in the living room. The remote control for the television sat untouched on the coffee table. We just looked at each other's faces as the time passed slowly, peacefully. We talked about raising children, about our dreams for the future, about memories from the past. We talked as if no time had passed at all. I thought to myself, so this is what it's like. This is the moment a family becomes a family again. The tears that flowed down my cheeks were hot, but they were gentle. I felt the weight of 40 years begin, just slightly, to lift. A few days later, a letter from my son arrived in the mail. It said, "Mom, I've decided we won't use the money. From now on, I'm going to work to pay you back for everything. Please just let us keep trying to earn back your trust. Please keep believing in the people we became tonight." I just smiled, a small, quiet smile. And I wrote back just 5 words. "Yes, I believe in you." That night, I saw it so clearly. I saw the look in their eyes change. In my son's eyes, for the first time, I saw hesitation. And that hesitation soon gave way to regret. And then, finally, to respect. He must have finally realized it. That his mother was not just some elderly woman with no retirement savings. She was a human being who had gambled her entire life for the sake of his future. After so many years as a salaried professional, a man who had learned to measure value in numbers and rational decisions, he had come to see his own mother as little more than a responsibility to be managed. But that night, he came face to face with my resolve, with my pride. As for my daughter-in-law, Lauren, she was speechless with shock and shame. He had dismissed me, convinced herself that I was just a dependent who had come to rely on them. For her, the cash on the table was not just money, it was a mirror, forcing her to confront her own shallow judgments. That night, for the very first time, she looked me straight in the eye. She wasn't looking away, and she wasn't looking down on me. She just held my gaze, silently holding back her own tears. For me, that look was more of an apology than any words could ever be. People can be moved by money, it's true, but sometimes they can also be moved by the love that is woven into it. That night, I came to a profound understanding. A family is a group of people who often pretend to understand each other, when in truth, they aren't really looking at one another at all. But that box, the sheer weight of $70,000, shattered the silence and reached a place deep inside their hearts. If I had simply yelled back at them in that moment, I'm certain my son and his wife would have closed their hearts to me for good. But I wanted to convey my will as a mother, not with emotion, but with an action. And that action is what moved their souls. Ever since that night, a certain softness has found its way into my daughter-in-law's voice. My son, too, started looking me in the eye when he spoke. Not everything was solved, not by a long shot, but it was, without a doubt, the beginning. It was the first step we took back toward being a family. The next morning, I woke up quietly, as I always did, and stretched my arms in the corner of my room. But something about that morning felt different. The sound of footsteps in the hallway seemed calmer, more gentle than before. When I made my way to the kitchen, I saw that the table was already set for 3. There was a plate with a perfectly cooked piece of salmon, a bowl of warm vegetable broth, and next to my plate, a small dish of my favorite tart cherry preserves. "Good morning, Mom." I turned around. It was Lauren, my daughter-in-law. She was looking right at me, not averting her gaze, and she gave a small, quiet nod. The thorny, sharp edge I had always heard in her voice was gone, as if it had simply melted away. Would you like to eat with us?" I was speechless for a moment. All I could manage was a small, quiet, "yes." And so, the 3 of us sat down at the same table that morning, the first time that had ever happened since I'd arrived in this home. After a few moments of quiet, my son spoke up, his voice soft. "Mom's cherry preserves. They bring back so many memories. I used to have them every morning when I was a kid, remember?" I couldn't help but smile. In that instant, Lauren also smiled back, and I saw the tension visibly leave her shoulders. To think that a single spoonful of cherry preserves could bridge the vast, emotional distance that had grown between us. After our meal, I happened to go into the laundry room. There, hanging neatly over the side of the washing machine, was a single, freshly laundered hand towel. It was the one I'd used for years, an old, slightly faded one, with my embroidery on the corner. I was certain I had folded it without washing it the night before and placed it on the shelf. There was no need to wonder who had washed it for me. Lauren hadn't said a word. She had simply, quietly, respected my time, my life. It wasn't an, "I'm sorry," and it wasn't a "thank you." It was a silent testament that she was finally, truly trying to understand. There were no words, but that one clean hand towel moved my heart more deeply than any apology could. Maybe this is what a family really is, I thought. The willingness to keep waking up to a new morning together, even after you've hurt each other. I finally understood that this feeling, this simple commitment, might be the most important form of love there is. I didn't end up leaving them, but I did make a decision. I decided to use the money I'd saved from my own work to rent a small apartment. For myself, just a 10-minute walk from their building. This way, if you ever need anything, I can be here in a flash, I explained. As I packed my things, I saw a flicker of sadness in my son's eyes. That first night in my new place, I made myself a small dinner of soup and steamed vegetables. I sat at my little kitchen table, folded my hands, and felt a profound sense of peace. The room was empty, but my heart, strangely, was still. The place I moved into was an old, two-story clapboard building. It was tucked away on a quiet side street, a short walk from the subway station. The landlord kept a lovely garden in the front yard, planting flowers that changed with the seasons. There was something nostalgic and comforting about the air there. My apartment was a simple studio with a small kitchenette and a balcony that got wonderful morning sun. But that very simplicity felt good. It felt like I had finally found a place where I could breathe my own air. In the mornings, I would make a simple soup with vegetables I bought from the corner market and start my day with a few gentle stretches. In the afternoons, I would spread out my fabrics and threads and lose myself in my embroidery. The only sound in the room would be the soft whisper of the needle, a silent conversation between my past and my future. Sometimes, I'd take a walk to a nearby park and eat a sandwich while sitting on a bench. I'd watch the children laughing on the playground or an old couple walking their dog. And I would quietly think to myself, I'm still alive. One day, a young woman who lived next door said hello to me. As we started talking, she confessed that she had been struggling with the loneliness of living in a big city. I offered her some of the stew I'd made and said, "Would you like to try embroidery with me sometime?" Now, every Wednesday afternoon, a small group of young mothers gathers in my apartment, their hands moving quietly with their needles and thread. We don't talk much, but I can feel our hearts connecting through the threads we stitch. On my balcony, I've lined up the pots of morning glories I've cared for over the years. Every time the season changes and new flowers bloom, I organize my embroidery floss to match their colors. Today's color is a gentle lavender, I'll murmur to myself, enjoying the peaceful passage of time. At night, I set out a meal for one at my little table and watch the city lights flicker in the distance through my window. I am alone, but I am not lonely, because deep inside, I finally have a place where I belong. I don't have to walk on eggshells around anyone anymore. I can just be myself. It was because of this new life, in this new place, that I was finally able to feel that way. After I settled in, I started visiting my son's home every weekend. My little granddaughter would run to the door the moment she heard me. "Grandma!" she'd shout, throwing her arms around my legs. "What are you going to make for us today? Will you tell me an old story?" Those questions were the sweetest music to my ears. I'd add a little extra seasoning to the soup and, with my needle and thread in hand, I'd tell her stories from the old days, tales from when I was a young woman. One afternoon, I was at the local community center. A group of young mothers were gathered, and I overheard one of them say, "My kids are on their video games all day. They just don't have any attention span." On an impulse, I spoke up. "Why don't you try embroidery together? When you use your fingertips, it helps calm the mind." That one comment was the beginning of my embroidery circle for mothers. It started with just 3 women, but through word of mouth, it slowly grew. Now, we have a group of more than 10. At first, their hands trembled as they held the needles, but now they work in focused silence, carefully, lovingly stitching their feelings into the fabric. A reporter from a local newspaper happened to see one of our sessions and wrote an article about us. The headline read, "No pension, no problem. 74-year-old artisan stitches a new life after family heartbreak." The article talked about my past, my life now, and the choice I made to forgive. After I finished reading it, the tears just wouldn't stop falling. I wasn't alone. Even if our hearts drift apart for a time, people can always find their way back to each other. A few days later, a letter arrived from a woman who had read the article. She wrote, "I said some terrible things to my mother, and now she's gone, and I can never see her again. Reading your story made me feel like I could at least apologize to her in my heart. Thank you." Words that truly reach the heart, I realized, have a quiet but certain power to change someone's life. On Sunday, my granddaughter came to visit me at my apartment. She was holding a small handkerchief she had stitched herself. "Grandma," she said, "this embroidery says thank you." The letters were a little crooked, but that simple piece of cloth pierced my heart more deeply than any designer brand ever could. "Thank you, my sweet girl." I said it quietly as I pulled her into a gentle hug. This, I thought, is what it feels like when your heart finally unknots. It was my 75th birthday. The morning was quiet, and I could hear the faint chirping of birds in the distance. I wasn't expecting anything special. I sat on my cushion with my needle and thread, just as I did every day, peacefully making one stitch after another. Then, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my son Michael was standing there with his wife Lauren, and my little granddaughter. "Mom, happy birthday." I almost dropped the piece I was working on. It had been how many months since they had last come to my home. In my small living room, they had set up a homemade cake, some folded party decorations, and a small tablecloth spread on my little table. In the center was a letter and a small wrapped gift. My granddaughter shyly held out a pale pink handkerchief. On the corner, in still clumsy letters, she had embroidered, "Grandma, someday, I want to live like you." In that moment, I couldn't say a word. That $70,000 I had offered them through my tears that night, I finally understood the kind of shock it must have been. I finally understood what it had shown them. I held the handkerchief to my chest and bowed my head deeply. Then, Lauren stepped closer and said in a small voice, "Mom, I am so sorry." I was too hasty. I smiled. "It's all right. People make mistakes. But having the heart to want to fix them, that is more than enough." That day, for the very first time, the 3 of them sat around my little table, and we drank warm, homemade soup together. I know I will never forget the taste of that soup for as long as I live. My granddaughter asked me, "Grandma, why are you so kind?" I told her, "Kindness is a type of strength, sweetheart. It's something you can only have after you've been hurt a lot." After they left, I went out onto my balcony alone and looked up at the sky. There was no resentment left in me, no anger. For the rest of my life, I just want to share the warmth of a needle and thread with as many people as I can. And I want to quietly pass on the truth that no matter what your past holds, you can always change. Memories are a form of wealth. They are something money can't buy, something that lives deep in your heart. I was able to leave that treasure for my children, and that alone was more than enough to make me happy. From that day forward, everything began to change, little by little, not because we forced it, but naturally, gently, like the wind carrying a new season. Now, every morning, I brew a cup of tea in my own room, talk to the small plants on my balcony, and enjoy the quiet time. Sometimes, the sound of my granddaughter's laughter echoes in my mind like a memory, and it sends a gentle ripple of warmth through my heart. At my age, I've learned that it is far easier to forgive someone than it is to wait to be forgiven. Life is too short to live with resentment. And more than anything, holding on to anger only makes your own soul wither. That day, when my daughter-in-law, Lauren, bowed her head to me, I felt the pain that had been coiled deep inside my heart begin to gently dissolve. The impatience of youth, the anxiety, the things she couldn't see. I'm sure I hurt people in the same way when I was her age. That's why I believe forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for you. It's what you do to lighten the burden on your own soul. Every time I look at the embroidered handkerchief my granddaughter gave me, I think to myself, life is a road that always leads back to kindness. Even if you take the long way around, there were hard times. Gear Munch with Era Gudge, there were nights I thought I would be crushed by loneliness. But now I have days where I can say, thank you, from the bottom of my heart. And that is more than enough to make me happy. Has anyone ever told you that you are a burden, before they even knew what you sacrificed for them? Have you ever been made to feel worthless simply because you don't have a pension? As if growing old was reason enough to be pushed out of the family circle? The paths we have walked are filled with countless sacrifices and an immeasurable love. That is the true weight of a life, something that can't be measured by a bank account balance. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about protecting your own dignity. So that one day, you can say, I am not a burden. I am the memory of this family. I am its roots. Or if you are a mother who has given everything, please, write this in the comments below, Mom. I still need you. Follow this channel right now and please, receive this story so that someone out there can realize the truth before it's too late. If you believe in the bonds of family, in the power of memory, and in the quiet acts of kindness that we can't always see, please like, comment, and follow. Because some things are more precious than money, and once they're gone, you can never get them back.